My name is Emory M Jr. and this is Exercise and Movement Techniques. And today we are at Sacred Studio Brooklyn with founder Dara Cole, yoga instructor, and woman about town.
Thank you, hi.
So thank you for having me to be able to do this. So obviously you're into yoga, and how long have you been teaching yoga?
I've been teaching since 2004.
And how long before that were you practicing?
I had a pretty short practice. I fell in love with yoga right away and then went to teacher training. So I was 6 months in when I went to training. So yeah, for like...
Wow.
Yeah.
So you felt the calling, as it were?
I felt the calling right away. And it was a major career change, and it was a surprise. I wasn't a particularly movement-centered person.
Okay.
I had taken a few yoga classes before I really fell into a hot yoga practice.
Okay.
And I thought that they were kind of nice, but they didn't hook me right from the beginning. And then I saw huge shifts in my life as soon as I started a regular practice. And
so you practice predominantly hot yoga?
Mm-hmm.
And that's your modality?
Mainly, I feel really open to a lot of different things. So at my studio, I mostly practice and teach hot yoga.
Okay.
And then in my personal practice, I practice at home and I don't heat up my apartment.
Right.
And there's so many masterful teachers in in New York. So from time to time, I'll go wherever I feel like I can learn something. Right.
New York is kind of the mecca for a lot of things. New York and LA, actually, where mostly we see the trend starting. Tell me, why do you think yoga is so big in the U.S.? Why did they call you specifically? I mean, what was it that was like, I gotta teach you, I have to do this?
I think that we live in a culture that really doesn't teach the things that yoga does, and so we are disembodied as people in the West. We're not able to feel. We have way too much bombardment to our senses. Mm-hmm. We feel lost, don't know where we are, a lot of times don't know how to connect even to the people that we love. And so yoga really works as medicine and helps us feel better on many different levels. So in a very short period of time, it can start making connections where you feel more like yourself.
Okay. And
your life gets better. And so lots of different modalities provide pieces of that, and I think you can find yoga in anything, or a sense of connecting with breath and moving with spirit, but I think it happens really, really quickly and deeply for people with a yoga practice.
I think it's maybe accessible for in some respects, because some of the other techniques, maybe you can't even find an instructor in certain forms of meditation, qigong, things like that. It's very difficult, I think, maybe, and there's a cultural barrier, I think, that's kind of broken down with the American yoga establishment, whereas it's a lot different. We can walk in a class. I know people who don't like teachers who use the Sanskrit or use yoga Indian terminology because they feel like it alienates them, and I know teachers who do use it. So I think there's so much of a variety now for people to be able to access it. But I was always curious about, I mean, when I first started, there was only, I think, 2 schools in New York City. And at that time, it was very difficult to find yoga anywhere else other than maybe Los Angeles or some practitioners. But they weren't commercial practitioners. No one ever said really that they were doing it. And then all of a sudden, I don't know where it came from. It was just like, boom.
It's a craze. Yoga craze.
I mean, I think it came after Pilates, actually, because Pilates sort of picked up and hit. And I think that maybe even opened the door for modalities that were focusing more inward.
And I think that we, the first sort of exercise craze created a lot of injuries too. And so when people were doing lots of like high impact aerobics, all of it, and like and then you get hurt, and then you stop moving, and then there's, I know a lot of dancers who danced professionally and then sort of stopped dancing because they were too injured or stopped dancing, at least professionally, and then are looking for that place to get back into the essence of moving in a way that feels good and is therapeutic and at its best.
But there are a lot of evidence to say that yoga also causes damage. I remember, 10, 15 years ago, someone was trying to get me to go to a class, and I won't mention the particular studio, but it's very famous, and she was saying, oh, you would like it, you would really like it. And I was like, well, what would I like about it? She's like, oh, it's really, really tough, And I was like, well, did you go? And she said, yeah, I stopped, but I injured my back there. And I was just like, why would I go to a place where you injured your back? And she wasn't the only one. It was actually known at that time, and even still, that they push people into gymnastic positions and push people to the extreme. And quite a few people have been hurt doing yoga, internally and externally.
Yeah, it's true. And I think in anything physical, there's the possibility of injury. So I'll say in any studio that's possible. I've had injuries, you're using your body. And I think that anything, even yoga, when it becomes just about how far you can go, how extreme you can do it, how it looks. To me, at some point, it's not even really yoga then, but that's a whole debate.
Yes, there's a discussion going on now as to what is yoga and what isn't yoga, and since it has become so commercialized, extremely commercialized, I think it's harder for people to find practitioners than it was before. In the 80s, for instance, when there only was a handful of studios, they were really good. But it was, you didn't have many choices, but when you went, those teachers had been, on the average, teaching 10, 20, 30 years, and they had been practicing 10, 20, 30 years before they even taught. And it was it really wasn't so much about it being a business then, and I don't even know how they stayed open, to be honest with you. I think a lot of them didn't, or it was kind of like maybe not for profit or something like that. And I don't know, I guess for me, I love all of the movement disciplines, and I see that the teacher really is the difference. It isn't so much the modality anymore, it's all about the teacher. Because even with things like Pilates technique, you can definitely get hurt.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's the teacher, and that's, and a lot of times you're learning what your limits and what your possibilities and what proper alignment and technique. You learn that from the teacher. But I also feel like
you hope
at some point you hope you learn that from the teacher, or you learn the wrong thing from the teacher. But I do think that at some point in your practice, you also become your own teacher. And there's things that that I might go that somebody would instruct me to do that I would never do.
But you're an instructor.
Right.
So for the layperson, actually, that's one of the reasons why I do these interviews, is to try and educate people in the approaches.
Right.
And how to select a good teacher, how to select a modality that's good for them, that isn't going to harm them and rewards them. Because a lot of people get turned off with exercise in general because they may have a bad experience when they begin it, or they may have a bad experience, or they don't get the results that they thought they were going to get, or they're forming opinions about what the expectation is by things that are told to them by the media that have nothing to do with health and fitness. And so
I think there's what I always sort of share with beginners is that you really are looking for that place where you have an appropriate amount of challenge, and so you want to be challenged because you're getting stronger, and so you're building strength, and you want to work at that really intelligent edge, but it's an intelligent edge. If you have to go outside of your body, if you lose your breathing, if you find that you're not that good kind of sore after, but it hurts to be alive, then it's too much too quick, and you got to back.
I've never heard of that. Put it that way.
you gotta back. gotta back up in terms of how many repetitions or in terms of the depth, and
I would say so.
you know, and get back to the foundations. So, but to some extent, it does have to be an individual, not like, you know, you have to be able to moderate yourself to some extent, even from the beginning, and be able to check in and trust that you know what feels right more than anybody else does.
We're talking about individual responsibility, and that's something that is not really, in our culture, that's not something that's prevalent generally. People they give away their responsibility to authorities all the time. You know, even our educational system has kind of pushed people towards saying, well, that's the authority, how dare you have an opinion or an outlook different than what the authority says, because that's the authority. And I think that's where a lot of people do get injured, is that they don't trust their own feeling and their own feedback.
And I think at its best, yoga has the possibility and the capacity to really start to build an individual sense of knowing and responsibility.
Yes.
And yoga at its worst becomes some sort of a cult following, where you believe that somebody else truly knows who you are better than you know yourself. And so there's definitely both sides.
Well, thank you for pointing out the parameters, because I think it's important for people to know that just because you're practicing something, a modality, yoga, Pilates, gyrotonic, Feldenkrais, climb, etc., does not mean that the modality is, it isn't going to do it for you. You have to take as much responsibility for being in there as the teacher does for being a good educator, and making sure to the best of their ability that you're doing it properly and that you're not getting hurt. And this, of course, is assuming that you're having people with integrity going in front of the room, which obviously you are.
I try to be.
Well, it comes through. I mean, people will sense somebody who's there for them and whose mission is to make sure that they're okay. You know, and that you're on, you know, if you're on my train and I'm the one driving the train, you know, I'm in front, but you guys are very important to me. You know, I don't want to crash the train and hurt myself, and I certainly don't want to hurt anybody else. Not using this, you know, thinking about what just recently happened. But
it still works.
Yeah. So do you, I mean, you gave a couple of examples, but is it just 3 tips that you could throw out for people who are either looking for a practice or already engaged in a practice, to kind of take them to the next level or keep them safe from falling into
Yes.
the groupie
My
pitfall?
first tip is not to wait. Like, the thing that I hear the most from people is, oh, I could never do yoga, or I'd love to do yoga, but I'm too inflexible. And I'm always like, that's like being like, I'm sick, so I can't go to the doctor.
Sure.
So just come as you are. I think find, you know, and don't start with TV, like find a real teacher and shop around. Find, you know, really trust that feeling, go to a few places. I think beginners classes can be really good for people, or classes that are geared towards, depends what you're coming into it. If you come from a really active background and a lot of other disciplines, maybe you don't need that. But if you haven't moved for a while, or you're experiencing a lot of injuries, getting those foundations down, I still like to go back to them too.
Yeah, even if I think that even if you are a professional for many years in another discipline, or even in the same discipline, I love taking beginner classes because we get informed again in the fundamentals. And it's different when you've been practicing for a long time and you can go back and be like, wow, I remember when this was really, you know, something entirely different. I'm actually enjoying the beginner class where it used to kill me.
Yeah. You know, and I think just recognizing that it's a practice, so it takes time. So progression, like if you're gonna, you know, shop around a bit, find somewhere that feels good or that resonates, better if it's close to your house because you'll go more often.
Sure.
If you make it really inconvenient, you sort of set yourself up to for it to fall away, and then just dedicate yourself to going for
so
circles.
much. And I was wondering if we can get you to maybe show us just something so that people can see you move a little bit.
Sure. Like what?
I'll leave that up to you.